Hello everyone, and welcome to This Nintendo Life episode 278. My name is NBZ, and God willing, Bally, I will not cough once during this entire recording. It's been, every time that this happens, there's the secondary knock-on effect of, first of all, it's me just, feeling bad during recording, but then I make both of us feel bad, because then we're sitting in the editing room being like, well, let's remove all of these NBZ coughs from this timeline and just delete them.
I wish you had a touch-sensitive mute button.
It would be nice,
it's
and
good.
I think we're looking at new microphone stuff, and hopefully that's something that will help a lot. But the thing that I do like about it is having coughs in there is just it is very clear and obvious. At least when
you're full on choking and dying, and I'm like, right, I think MBZ coughed there.
I think particularly because the way that I edit is I edit at crossover points, basically what I call them is when I see a crossover point in the audio, that's when I basically speed through until I find one of those, and then I just listen to it to make sure it's okay. And if it's just me going yes, sometimes I've found myself deleting a lot more of that stuff, because I find I do that a lot in conversation. I respond verbally a lot when someone else is talking, and so I find myself removing that a lot, but also when you see a thing, I just see it, and then I listen to it, I'm like, oh, that's a bad guy. It always feels good removing it as well, because that no one has to hear it. You're removing it from the listener's ear.
It's one thing I was taught. So I did a master's in television journalism, so we were taught how to make news packages, and part of news packages are you're interviewing interviewees. And when you're interviewing interviewees for a news package, it's important you don't go, because it gets picked up in the mic. So it's very important that you're just basically nodding and smiling.
You're just silent, yes.
Interview and being silent, exactly.
Yeah.
So it works in edit.
That makes a lot of sense. I have not done that, though, so I just keep doing it. I feel like it's a thing, because otherwise people think I'm not there anymore. It's I just feel like I have to have the presence. But then
I normally am very heavy on the when I've got a point to come in. That's my
that's
my
your signal
to
to
hey, I'm trying to get in
I
here.
want to say
right?
a conversation piece. I just say it every time regardless. So that's just the way it is, I guess. But it's one of those things that's difficult to iron out of the way that you talk, but that's how it is sometimes. But today we're going to talk about video games. Bally, what are we talking about on today's show?
For the first segment, we're going to talk about the games that we have been playing, and for the second segment, it's time for emails again.
And I think maybe, Bally, we just say at the top of this segment, we'll reiterate it when we get to emails. Send us some fucking emails, all right? Get in the inbox, just type your fucking keyboards, send them through. We're pretty low.
Me and MBZ, we follow quite a lot of video gaming news. So if you see anything in the video game news or something, you're like, hey, I wonder what MBZ and Bally think about that. Send us an email. We'll talk about it. We love to talk about stuff like that. So it's most welcome.
I jest, of course. But yes, if you would like to send an email, please do that. Bally, where can they send that email to?
Please email ThisNintendoLife@gmail.com. That is ThisNintendoLife@gmail.com. We also have a channel in our Discord server. That's also a great place to drop an email, a comment, a question about the news or something. We'd love to hear it.
I look forward to hearing an email from someone being like, well, MBZ shouted at me on the show, so now I have to do this. So I hope that causes some action on the part of the listeners. But yes, Bally, let's talk about some video games. And I've been playing a new video game that I think is a Switch exclusive. Probably do some checking on that. I believe so. The brand new Super Monkey Ball video game has released. So this is quite interesting, because I remember this being announced, and then I completely forgot about it. And then I was on my trip to Chicago, and I was just looking on Twitter, and it's Monkey Ball came out, and I was like, what the fuck? Wait, what? So in my hotel room in Chicago, I ordered a copy of Monkey Ball to arrive, so that when I got home on that Friday, I could play it the whole weekend. I obviously ended up being sick and not being able to play a huge amount of it, but I did have it nonetheless, and I did play some of it while I was in bed and while I was being terribly accosted by the coronavirus. But yeah, I think it's one of those interesting things where I don't know what it is about it, but I feel like I was looking at reviews for it, and I was looking at what people were saying, and people were saying all the right things. And, we've got a decent history with Monkey Ball in the past. We've played some of the handheld games. We've played games on the Wii, on GameCube, and
I don't think it had a Wii U one, did it?
I don't think there was a Wii U Monkey Ball. No, don't believe so.
And then they came back firing on the Switch.
Yeah, so it was absent for a while, right? And I think the thing that brought it back was a couple of years ago they put out Banana Mania, right? And Banana Mania was a remake of the original 2 GameCube games, so Monkey Ball 1 and Monkey Ball 2. So it had all the levels from those games and the campaign mode, the story mode, all that sort of stuff. That came out and was really, really good. I think it was somewhere in my Games of the Year list that didn't come out that year. And I had a fantastic time with it. As someone who grew up with Monkey Ball 1 and Monkey Ball 2, mainly Monkey Ball 2 is the one that I owned. I was always that kid who was just like, I loved the idea of Monkey Ball, but I was always not amazing at it, so I could never like get past some of the middle levels. And I think those games were particularly harsh back in the day. And what happened to Monkey Ball as a series is that it eventually softened over time. People kind of bemoaned the fact of a game like Banana Blitz on Wii, introduced this jumping stuff, and also you're using Wii motion controls, and it just felt like there were guardrails on everything, right? And like fundamentally they're still fun games, and they had like weird boss fights and stuff in that game, but I think they lost the essence of how disgustingly sicko those levels could be in the originals, right? I think that's what I really loved about Monkey Ball was it's that feeling of just trying again and again, bashing your head against a really hard level until you eventually break through and you find some way of doing it, or you luck your way into the goal.
And you need an analog stick for that, right? Like
yes,
mapping it to Wii motion was one of those things that was really cool when we didn't know what the Wii was yet, and it was,
it was like a launch title as well. So it was a launch
title, and it was showing off. We're like, yeah, Monkey Ball with the Wiimote, and we obviously both bought the game, and we enjoyed it in the moment. But yeah, with the knowledge of time, you realize, actually, those games that use the analog stick are just a lot more solid and tough in a good way, and you have more control.
I think it's just a level design thing as well, right? It's not just the controls. It was the level design in the Wii game was inherently quite simple, and tried to be a bit fairer to people, but in a way that was a bit boring, because like if I clear a Monkey Ball level straight away without having much struggle, I don't have a good time. And we talk a lot about difficulty and like how generally it depends on genre, I think, for us, right? Like what we like difficult games to be. I like difficult turn-based strategy games. I like difficult platformers. I don't like difficult RPGs, right? Like, I don't like...
Is Monkey Ball a tough platformer where you don't actually jump?
I guess it is an adjacent game in the platforming space, right?
Because it's all about not falling off, but most games where you're not meant to fall off, you're able to jump.
It's fundamentally a game about movement, right? So I guess that's why I like Monkey Ball to be hard, is because it is kind of a platformer, right? It's a, like you said, it's a platformer without jumping, and so that creates different challenges, but I still find myself just yearning for that kind of crushing difficulty level, or at least like a level that's going to push back on me significantly to where I have to spend 10 to 15 minutes on it, figuring it out, learning its quirks, and getting good at it, right? And I think that's where I like my Monkey Ball to be. That's where I find satisfaction. And so, 1 and 2 got remade as Banana Mania, which I really, really enjoyed, and was able to like kind of go back and do that childhood thing of like, I was a kid and I couldn't beat this level. Now I beat it for the first time and felt really good and got all the way to the end of that. And I think like the main campaign of Monkey Ball 2 in particular just has this really good ramp up in difficulty where like by the 4th or 5th world it's already starting to get challenging, and then it just keeps going from there, and it just feels there's like a lot of memorable levels, a lot of really good stuff in there. So Banana Rumble comes out, and a lot of people are saying stuff about it like, hey, this has similar like level design chops to the original Monkey Ball games, and feels like it is trying to be in that lineage. And I think there's something about those original Monkey Ball games that a lot of the level design wasn't random necessarily, but there's a lot of random things like these giant oblong balls that would bounce like in this weird way, or just enormously like big kind of like cylindrical things, like giant set piece things that felt odd and weird.
A bit like a Fall Guys level.
Yeah, I would say more chaotic than that though, right? Like just more chaotic in their visual aesthetic and design to where you get to a level and you're like, this just looks like some random things put together, but it's all very well thought out, right? It's all very well thought out level design wise. It just feels a bit chaotic, and I think that's definitely the case here. What I will say is that there's kind of two levels, right? And I think Nintendo does this a lot. When we played Super Mario 3D Land, the whole idea was the first half of that game is like a cakewalk. You can just blindfold walk through it, finish that, and have no issue. The real challenge comes in unlocking the second kind of half of it, where you do all the secret worlds, and that is where the enjoyment comes from. And I say that is partially true here, where I think the easy difficulty, the kind of easy on-ramp of Banana Rumble, which, by the way, can they just get better at naming these fucking video games? I've tried to figure out Blitz, Rumble, Mania, that none of them like have a good enough distinction, like they don't feel like they stand out. A lot of people I've heard talk about this game have been referencing it as Banana Mania when it is in fact Banana Rumble. It's just bad. Like, honestly, they could have just called it Super Monkey Ball 3, and to be frank, I think that would have been a little quite honest with it.
Are they saving that number for something?
I don't know if they are. I feel like it's just a bit of a... It's terrifying to do that because, like, by doing that, you're saying something, right? Like, you're putting a statement out there, and I don't think they're ready to do that. Despite the fact that I think you could probably do that with this game, but this game, as I was saying, it definitely feels like it takes a little bit longer to get to the hard stuff, and so maybe it's world like 7 or 8 by the time that starts showing up. But when it does, it is very clear there is a lot of inspiration that's been taken from the original games. And I really just found myself bumping up against these like very challenging levels, ones where you have to be quite precise in your movement. One that really reminded me of some of the ones I got stuck on back in the day when I was younger. There's this one in particular where it starts off as this kind of boost rail. So you're just on a boost on this thin platform and you're boosting all the way, and you get to the end and you jump in the air, and there are a set of kind of cylindrical circles ahead of you, and there's a gap between each one, and you basically have to like rotate yourself inside these cylinders. They're moving around constantly, and so they're circling about, and you have to find your way to like have a gap to move to the next one when there's a bunch of like empty air in underneath you, and jumping, and there's like 12 of these things in a row. And so it is this thing of like, when I first started, I was like, fuck man, like I have to wait all this time to get across the next one, that I finally realized that there was kind of a cadence created where there was a really thin path I could make through if I just blitzed it, because they're moving at a certain speed, and at one point the movement lined up to where like 4 or 6 in a row I could just dash through them and use that momentum to like basically get my way to the middle and then do it again to get to the end, because otherwise, like, I was spending so long doing this that it would have taken far longer than the 60-second time limit in order to get to the end. And you get to the end, and you're like, okay, I have to use these boost pads to give myself enough momentum to then jump my way over to another cylinder that's the one that contains the goal in it. And the process of going through that, learning it, spending like half an hour just playing that one level, so satisfying. And I think there's this other thing that happens with Monkey Ball where there are some levels where you can see the goal and you're like, if I just fucking just belt it here, I could just fling myself across this entire fucking stage and just get into the goal instantly and do it on my first try in 3 seconds. And every time that happens, that is also extremely satisfying. I find that there's something about this series where no matter what approach you take, whether it's the slow and steady collecting every banana, or if it's the speedrun focus, just try and get into the goal as quickly as possible, just trying to bypass all this bullshit, or just coming across a level that won't let you do that, that will force you to engage with it and just really just put your knuckle to the test, is it's so great that it works on every level, I find. And I think Monkey Ball just has that unique satisfaction to it. No matter how I approach a level or what I want to do, I always find a satisfaction in there somehow.
So does it have that same satisfaction as 1 and 2?
I think so. I think
Wow.
I think like when it comes to, so finishing the main 8 worlds, that's all good and
Did it
well.
take long?
I don't know. I feel like I blitzed through it quite fast. I would say...
Banana blitz through it?
Yeah, banana blitzed, in fact, through it. Rumbled my way to some mania. I think probably 2 to 3 hours for the first 8 worlds, but now I'm in the EX worlds, right? And this is what I was talking about with Mario 3D Land. Once you finish those first 8 worlds, you then unlock EX worlds, and I think like the suggestion from the game is like, oh, these are remixed versions of levels, but fundamentally they're all brand new levels. There's a bunch of brand new mechanics in here, and totally new stages. It feels like a second campaign essentially, and this is where the going gets good, right? This is where from the very beginning, it's like, oh, there's a little bit of challenges already pushing back in the first world. And so I found so far, I'm in world 5 of the EX worlds, and this is where I've really started to enjoy the game even more. Like, because I was enjoying it with the regular levels, but this is where they are creating some really devious shit. And some of it is just like, I'm doing one today, and it's a level where it's just thin platforms, and you have these moving kind of like rotating bars that you have to move along, and it is a precision, very, very patience focused level. And I kept trying to figure out, like, is there a way for me to, like, use a boost to get over here? And I should mention, actually, there is a significant mechanical change in this Monkey Ball game. They've introduced a mechanic where if you hold down the B button, you will start charging up your ball, and you will essentially do a sonic spin dash. It's basically a spin dash, essentially, where you build up momentum, you let go, and you will just boost in a direction, whatever direction you're pointing the analog stick in. And so this has been really interesting because you use this to, you know, in Monkey Ball level, sometimes there's like these points at which it's like, oh, you need to get up onto this ledge, and to get up on that ledge, you need to kind of like get a bit of momentum and push yourself, and like the physics will kind of like knock you up onto it, essentially. This changes that to where you can get up onto these ledges by holding down this this kind of charge move, and it will give you an instant burst of speed, which lets you kind of engage with that stuff and get up onto those ledges and things. But it also means that you can use this on like ramps and stuff to get yourself to fly further, or on the edge of like the lip of a stage, and that will potentially fling you all the way across. There was a level, like I was mentioning, right? Sometimes you do those levels where you just do a stupid thing and you beat it in 3 seconds on your first try. I did that today before we started recording, where I got to this level, I was like, I'm just going to try and just boost my way, and I somehow physicsed my way into the goal instantly. I was like, okay, well, I didn't
remember
really...
that distinctly in 1 and 2, just like, if I could just align this correctly, I can just throw the ball through that goal line, and
right,
it counts.
It feels so good as well. It's like, yeah, I guess I didn't engage with the design of this level at all, but also who cares, because I managed to do it just randomly, just like figuring it out just of my own accord. So yeah, I think that's an interesting addition. It feels like it's not necessary or like not really needed to complete any of the base world levels, but it does feel more necessary in the EX ones. And I don't know if that's the case or not. I know, don't know if you listened, Patrick Klepper was doing an interview over Summer Game Fest. He interviewed one of the people who is behind Astrobot, designing Astrobot. And in that interview, they talked about the original Astrobot game was designed to be beaten without using the hover at all. So someone who was just a kid who didn't know how to hover, didn't know how to hold down a button, could beat that game legitimately by just doing regular jumps the whole time. So I don't know if this is a situation where you can legitimately beat the entire thing, EX worlds and all, by not engaging with this mechanic. But it might very well be the case. I'm not sure. It seems like it's a possibility.
So the original Astrobot, as in like the VR game, you can...
No, sorry, Astro's Playroom, I want to say.
Oh, Astro's Playroom you can beat without any hover.
Without any hover at all. They designed the game deliberately in that way.
That's very cool.
Just fascinating. But yeah, I do wonder if that's the case here. But it has felt to me... when I'm doing these EX worlds, that I have had to take a lot more use of that ability, of that kind of holding down the dash in order to get through some of these stages. Some of them feel very difficult if you weren't to have that, basically. But yeah, it's just a joy. Like, something about this mechanical engagement of just like this entire massive stage that you're actually moving the stage and not the ball. But I always forget that. I always feel like I am actually in control of the ball. And the controls feel really good, you know? Like, I think that's one of the other things is past Monkey Ball games, especially when they like moved on to those non-traditional platforms like the DS and the Wii, always felt like the level of control just wasn't quite there. And it was in stark contrast to the originals because those were just like perfect. And these feel like they have maintained that pretty damn well. It's definitely not the same as the originals, but it feels really good. And like you feel like you see a very thin platform, and you feel like you have the ability to get over it. It just takes skill and patience and just testing yourself. And I think that is the thing that has really jumped out at me about this. I will say that there has been a not very nice side effect of Nintendo's actions / Elon Musk's actions, in that this is the first Switch game I've played where I can't record a video and be like, oh, I'll just post that to Twitter because that was a crazy thing that I just did. And like there have been so many moments of like doing these crazy things in Monkey Ball and getting to the goal in a mad way, or just doing it.
You can't send the videos like you can the images.
So you can't do any of that anymore, Bally. I don't know if you've heard of this. So basically...
but you can send the images.
No, you can't. Nope, you can't.
No. But you do a scan on your phone and then you just
the QR
upload it
code
through
thing.
That.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I've tried to do...
Can you do a QR code for the videos is what I'm asking.
I don't know. I have tried the QR code thing. It has not worked for me once. I've tried it multiple times. It's never worked for me. I don't know.
Loads.
Weird. Okay, that has never worked for me. I don't know why. It's extremely frustrating, but I'm just like very annoyed that this entire Twitter API thing has meant that it no longer is convenient to take a clip and post it to Twitter. It just feels like it's going to really hamper a lot of viral moments. I'm glad. I mean, it's good that Tears of the Kingdom was able to take advantage of it, but like now, no games can do that anymore, which sucks. Like it feels like it was such an important part.
It is possible. It's just a roundabout way. It's not.
Yeah, I guess, and I guess it's possible for some people because just doesn't fucking work for me doing it the QR code way.
I'd be interested to try out the video function because I'm interested to see if you can get a video onto your phone. You essentially download the thing onto your phone and then
you pretty much, yeah. Which again, it's not as convenient as obviously there's a way to do it still, but it's just not as streamlined, and it's not like most people won't do that, right? Most people will be like, oh, I can't post to Twitter anymore. Oh well, I guess I won't.
I think most people didn't do it anyway, but I hear it.
I think a lot of people did. I think like you're underestimating the effect that this stuff had. Like, just remember when Breath of the Wild came out and when Tears of the Kingdom came out. Like the amount of videos you see on Twitter because of the sharing aspect of the Switch. I think it's a pretty significant thing that a lot of people engaged with. And so it has been a real shame to play a game where a lot of fun, weird stuff can happen, and you can just have these insane wins, these insane kind of like getting into a goal, and it's just it feels like it's been muted. It feels like that whole social sharing aspect of the Switch is kind of gone now, and I hope there's a way to figure it out for Switch 2, but I doubt it's going to work because
bring back is it Miiverse?
I guess yeah, that's the only way to do it, is create your own social media platform, so you don't have to use one that's just rotting and dying, which sucks.
That'd be the best middle finger to Twitter, right?
Like,
we don't need to share on your
Miiverse
platform.
2, baby, we're back, all right. We got our own thing going on. That would be pretty great. So anyway, Super Monkey Ball, Banana Rumble. It has a bunch of multiplayer stuff in it as well, which I know Monkey Ball has like a rich history of multiplayer, Monkey Target and all those sort of things.
Baseball through the window.
Baseball, of course, the classic. But I again, it's one of those things that you kind of have to have people around to do. And I've also looked at it, and it seems like it doesn't run very well when it's in multiplayer. I think online as well is possible, but it's not something that I've really engaged with. When I play Monkey Ball, I'm here for the hardcore, the rolling around at the speed of sound, as I like to say. And yeah, it's been pretty great so far. So I will probably try and finish that up. I might get to a point where I just hit a wall and I'm like, this level is too hard. That certainly could be the case because these are EX levels, which is, they're called that for a reason. But I finished at least the main stuff, and I'm glad I've got more Monkey Ball to go back to. If nothing else, it's always something to return to and try and bash your head against. Good kind of podcast game as well. It's very, very nice to kind of just sit there and listen to something and just try and get through the goal. So
nice.
There you go. Bally, you have been playing something else, another video game.
I have. I've been playing Elechead, which is a puzzle platformer that came out. It was October 2021 on PC, and then it came out a year later on Switch in 2022. It's made by a guy called Nama Takahashi, who I think is just like...
He's a solo Japanese indie dev, right?
Solo Japanese indie developer. And I actually think a lot of the indies that we play, not many of them are often Japanese. So I think that's a cool thing in and of itself. And yeah, Elechead is a game where you play as this little character called Elechead. It's 2D puzzle platforming. And it's one of those games where I think it's predominantly about the thinking of what you're needing to execute rather than doing the actual execution of the platforming.
Okay.
But Elechead kind of interacts with the world in unique ways where, for example, Elechead can complete circuits. So Elechead basically has electricity coming out of him, flowing out of him, and when he walks on certain platforms, they light up yellow. The whole world is kind of this gray, and then he's yellow, and then anything that he's touching becomes yellow, and it draws a current. And you can kind of walk on one platform, it'll be yellow. You walk to another platform, it'll turn yellow. When you gradually walk between the two platforms, they will briefly both be yellow. That can also solve puzzles. Some platforms will move up and down, side to side when you're standing on them. And this is kind of the mechanics. There's kind of 6 broad areas. And for the first area, this is kind of what the mechanics pertain to. It's just like, right, I'm going to jump here. I jump on this. That moves me up here. I got to get down here. When I complete this circuit, it makes like this lightning appear that will kill me. So I need to avoid that. How do I get through this maze in a way where I don't electrocute myself? And then in worlds or the areas 2 to 6, they roll out this new mechanic, and that's the ability for Elechead to throw his head. Now, the cool thing about Elechead throwing his head is that all the electricity stays in the head part of Elechead, and the body remains electricity free. So you can now do stuff like, oh, that platform needs to raise. I'll throw my head to the platform. That creates this door that then I walk under, then I switch the thing and I come back, and now I've completed the puzzle. And there's like a number of things where, oh, I need the head to create this thing that you walk through, or sometimes there's like an area that's too small and only the body can fit through without the big head on it. And there's so many different puzzles that just take off from that second area onwards that is just so cool. And I think a lot of the puzzles are actually really, really well designed. It's kind of got like a very Box Boy pacing feel to it. Like they're very short levels.
So it's not like a contiguous world. This is No,
it is a contiguous world, but it feels contiguous in the same way as something like Celeste, where it's still area to area to area.
Oh, okay, so it's like, it's not quite Metroidvania. It's more like there are spaces to explore and do stuff in, but it's still relatively linear, I guess.
Yes, until and minor spoilers for the ending, but you get to the end, and then it throws basically a tunic puzzle in your face.
Oh, geez,
and
okay.
The tunic puzzle involves kind of Metroidvania exploration, and I was like, I don't really have the energy for this weird puzzle ending. I just thought it would have one more tough puzzle, and then credits would roll, and it's not that simple. It does some cool stuff. I'm not saying it's a bad thing for the game to do,
right.
But I kind of just like went to a YouTube guy and thought, right, okay, I'm going to do this, and this, and this links to this, and oh, that's cool, and then it unlocks this secret thing, and oh, that's cool, and then credits roll, and oh, okay, that was a cool video game.
I guess, does it feel like that because it kind of comes out of nowhere? Like, I think the thing that Tunic does so well is that it's constantly breadcrumbing that idea, so by the point you get there, you're committed to it because you've been strung along, whereas this sounds like it's a very traditional 2D puzzle platformer, and then all of a sudden, here's this mega puzzle to do. Yeah,
I would say there's maybe 3 or 4 puzzles along the way that do feel a bit fourth wall breaky at points, which I got a couple of them and was like really chuffed with myself. So I wouldn't say the game is completely un-Tunic like, but then it kind of melds that with a bit of Metroidvania for this final bit that feels very different to what you were doing before. But yeah, the way that this game gets you to do the mechanic of throwing the head and working out puzzles is very satisfying. Like there's one where you are throwing the head to and the platform moves back, and as the platform moves back, you catch your head again, and then you got to throw it, and then you catch it, throw it, catch it, throw it, catch it, and you're like slingshotting your way down the line. Or there's this tunnel where if electricity touches any of the sides, you are dead. So you are literally throwing your head up in the air, jumping, throwing it up in the air, jumping, and you're throwing it back up in the air before your feet reach the ground again. So it sounds very hard to execute.
Right.
I don't think...
Yeah, how does this function? Is it like a thing where you have like a Yoshi's Island style egg line where you're throwing your head, or is it just a single button to throw your head?
You can there's a single button, and you either throw it vertically up or exactly horizontally across. And once the head is thrown, it definitely has a lot of hang time. It's got a lot of floating hang time.
Right.
So if you throw it horizontally, you can then run, pick it up, throw, run, pick it up without touching the bottom and electrocuting yourself on certain puzzles, for example. Like
so you could go faster than the head. Like if you throw the head, you can then catch up to it, is what you're saying.
Yeah, you catch up to it. You
Right.
can catch up to it, which is very cool. Like it's there's a lot of thought that has gone into like these puzzles, and I love a puzzle game that challenges me, and I don't love looking at a guide. And I'll admit I needed a guide for a decent chunk of the final few puzzles, but up until then, like I think the pacing is just immaculate. Like it's I think the first 3 worlds are pretty straightforward. I don't think there's too much there, but it's still very satisfying to just like blast through and work out and just keep going. And I was looking for something short.
Does it do much with the kind of like visual identity of these areas? Like, does it, to me, from what I've seen, it just all looks kind of similarish, this kind of monochromatic.
That's definitely one downside of the game, is it's completely one visual identity, and arguably Box Boy was as well. It's that kind of style where the entire game, and Box Boy was a lot longer than this game. This game's like 2 to 3 hours, so I do like a bit of visual variety. This game definitely doesn't have that, but that's not to take anything away from like the actual design of the character. Elechead is very strong. The music feels I'd say it feels very Shovel Knighty. It's got real retro spring to it that I like, real good ear loops there.
This feels like, I guess, adjacent to Shovel Knight in the way that you could almost imagine Elechead as a character from the NES era.
Definitely.
And like it's a very unique concept of like, well, his thing is he has his head and he throws his head and it has electricity.
Yeah, he's a lost Mega Man boss or something. Like he's definitely got those vibes. And yeah, it's up there with some of my favorite puzzle platformers, I'd say. It's very good. I can't say I can name a ton of puzzle platformers that I've played. I don't think it's a genre that I've done a ton in, but
I guess stuff like the cinematic platformers, like the Limbos and the Insides, are kind of adjacent in a way.
I
played 2D and Top D, which I would say is an interesting, different, more puzzle focused, but still platformy. But yeah, there's a lot of them out there. I feel like they're just not coming to mind at the moment.
Yeah, I think this one I got quite excited by when I saw it in like Indie Worlds during the pandemic, and I thought this looks really cool. And I had it on my wish list for a while. It went on sale. I think I picked it up for like a few quid, and it's only 2 to 3 hours long. I would highly recommend checking it out on Switch. It's a very fun time. I think it's a really, really cool mechanic that they do. They just go to town with that one mechanic, and one downside I'd say maybe is that like you've got the 6 areas. The first area you don't have the mechanic, and then you get the mechanic in the second area, and then there's no more mechanics. Like I was very convinced there would be. Now maybe there's extra post game or something I'm not aware of, but to my knowledge there's no other mechanics. And I was definitely convinced after getting a mechanic in the second area, like, oh, we're going to get a new mechanic in each area. Now a bit like Box Boy, it kind of utilizes the existing mechanic in a new way in each area, so it does feel fresh in each area. But I would have maybe just liked one more thing. I don't know.
Got you. Yeah, I guess like the whole trick of it is, it's Elechead, and so the idea is like you slowly introduce it of like the whole person is electric, but then the head being the core thing. What kind of things do they do in terms of changing up the way you use the head? Is it like just to do with the way that you like move it places, or is there other like external mechanics that like interact with it in a different way?
Yeah, I mean there's like pillars that will only rise with electricity, and you kind of have to work out which pillar you have to get the chain reaction going for the pillar to raise you, and then you throw your head across to another pillar, raise that pillar in a way where you then come down and go back up again. And it's hard to explain, but it doesn't get old, that mechanic. There's even one where there's like these guns going off, and then you're like, shit, how do I get past these guns? And you realize from the starting point of the level to the guns, you need to not touch the ground once, because the second you touch the ground once, the guns start and you cannot get past the guns. And it took me a while to realize, oh shit, I need to like just not start the circuit at all. So it's kind of some of the more complicated areas where there are circuits that start and stop things, and working out how do you start and stop those things at the right time, and using the head mechanic to start and stop them at the right time is kind of where the game goes. That's kind of like the cool thing, I guess, that it evolves into. And it's tough. Like some of that stuff is very hard to work out. It's a really cool game. I would definitely recommend it.
Does it feel like the execution is something that, like, because I guess this is the thing we always come back to, right? Is like, is it the type of puzzle game where you figure out what to do in your head and then it's tricky to execute on it, or is the execution fun as well, like as part of doing it?
The execution is fun. The platforming is snappy, and I would argue none of the platforming is that difficult. I think for you and me, who've done quite a lot of 2D platformers, it is really not that difficult on the platforming front. The puzzling part is much tougher, and it's still satisfying. It's very satisfying. And I think the balance is... I kept thinking about Mark Brown and the game that he's currently making, Mind Over Magnet, where, for those who don't know, this YouTuber we both follow and love, would highly recommend, Game Maker's Toolkit, and he's currently making his first ever video game, and he has got a character called... Magnet? What's the character called?
Yeah, I can't remember actually, but it's all magnet themed.
The character is a magnet, and it's a 2D puzzle platformer, and all the levels are based in and around like throwing magnets, using magnets, interacting with doors and platforms and this kind of thing. And it really reminds...
I played the demo, by the way, during Steam Next Fest. I did download and play the demo.
And you enjoyed it?
He put out. It was cool. Yeah, it was interesting, and I'm curious to see how the final game turns out. But I don't know. I think it's a very tricky balance with these games, right? Because there is it's that point of like frustration versus satisfaction, and I think puzzle platformers fall into this more than any other type of video game, which is you can turn someone off very quickly if they feel that they rub up against it a bit too much, you know?
I remember Mark Brown saying he had to stop and think, like, am I making a platformer or a puzzle game with platforming elements? And like, there were some levels he was making that were just so difficult platforming wise, unintentionally, and others that were very difficult puzzle wise. And you think, oh my God, I'm going to turn off the puzzle people or the platforming people, depending on... There's very few people who come here for both in equal amounts, you know? So I think what Elechead does so well is the platforming is not difficult. For the most, there's still aspects you have to execute. I just don't think they are that difficult. And then, like I said, the puzzling is quite tough. And I think that balance is perfect. And I'm sure Mark Brown has played Elechead, but I think it's a great case study in his project of like making a puzzle platformer. Because
I think they are very similar games. It feels like it feels like he's going for a very similar thing to what Elechead is doing, which is a harder focus on puzzles, a harder focus on thinking about what you need to do, and then making the execution part of it reasonably simple to approach and to do.
Exactly.
Which I think is nice. I think that like creates this division between I don't know, I guess like the Planet of Lana and Inside and Limbos fall into that space as well, but I would say that oftentimes the execution can get frustrating in that style of game.
But because I'd argue like the narrative of those games slows the pacing down massively. Where regardless of almost the and I think Planet of Lana is more guilty, like you said, than Inside of this, but like the execution of some of the puzzles in Planet of Lana is quite slow. Elechead is like single room solutions, and the character runs faster. And Planet of Lana, there's a couple of puzzles that just like go across 3 screens, and there's enemies that catch you. There's stealth, and then you're going to do this, and then that, and Inside's better, but still has a few things that take a little longer, whereas Elechead's a very short, snappy experience, similar to like what Mark Brown's going for with his Mind Over Magnet.
Yeah, and I guess that's the distinction there of like the quote-unquote cinematic platformer versus the puzzle platformer.
Yeah,
I guess
cinematic implies a pace for sure.
Yes,
And you can
yes.
even apply that cinematic pace to the 3D realm with Ghost of Tsushima, Last of Us, where they all have a certain pace. They just don't feel snappy in the same way as like a game that focuses on the action, as it were.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense.
But yeah, would highly
Great.
recommend Elechead. It's on lots of things. Is it on lots of things, or is it just on Switch and PC?
I think it is on lots of things now, but I think Switch was kind of the main thing that it was promoted on. Makes a lot of sense because it feels very Nintendo-like in its approach. So.
It's got a lot of Nintendo-like Mega Man energy.
Yeah.
Definitely check it out.
Awesome. Yeah, I've been wanting to play this for a long time, so I will definitely get around to it and check it out. Yeah, very excited. Sounds great. Lovely. Well, Bally, 2023 was a year where I believe I played 0 Metroidvania games.
Impossible.
Yeah, I know. It's terrible.
Are you sure you actually played 0?
I'm pretty sure. If you look through my list of games that I played, I'm pretty sure I played... Unless you count me like dipping into randomly playing Metroid Fusion on like a train ride, but that's not, it's just like playing it once.
That's just like you breathing. Like.
It is, in fact, yes. Actually, I was playing Metroid Fusion on the train back from Brighton at 1 a.m. the other day. So, yes, I want to play Metroid Fusion. I actually also played WarioWare. I finished Game Boy Advance WarioWare again on my Ambernick. On the way back from Brighton. That last level, by the way, is fucking difficult. Trying to get 25 back-to-back mini-games on the hard Wario stage at the end of WarioWare on GBA. Challenging stuff. It took me like a good 40 minutes to do it, but I did do it. So technically I did finish that as well this year. But anyway, Metroidvanias, yeah, again, one of my favorite genres. Huge fan. I will play a lot of them. And something I've been realizing is I will play a average to mid Metroidvania and like it more than most people, I think. There's something about just the flow and the feel and the pace of Metroidvanias where I just can't put them down very easily, and I find myself just kind of barreling through them even when I didn't intend to do so. There's a game I played earlier this year. So obviously Prince of Persia came out earlier this year. Fantastic game. Had a great time with that. Loved it. And then I was like, well, I have not played lots of Metroidvanias recently.
You played Metroid Prime last year.
I did. That's true as well. Yeah, so that's the only Metroidvania that I played last year was in fact Metroid Prime. I guess when we're talking about 2D side-scrolling Metroidvania, traditional
2D,
ones, then I didn't play any, but I did play Metroid Prime.
I also played Metroid Prime Federation Force last year.
That's true, which is definitely not in the genre at all.
Metroidvania.
No. But yeah, so I also then picked up a game called After Image, which was a game from a team in China that came out like a couple of years ago, and I had always had my eye on it, and I was like, oh, this seems kind of interesting. So I had a copy of that from a code, and I was like, oh, I'm just going to play through this. And I don't think I ever talked about it on any of our shows, but it is like the definition of like a 6 or 7 out of 10 game, where it is like, okay, there's like not any new ideas being brought to the table here. It's just doing the Metroidvania thing. There's lots of levels in this game which are just like enormously big and feel like a lot of the environments are just kind of copy pasted and all that sort of stuff. None of the bosses are memorable at all. But I fucking had a great time. I had a really good time playing that game, and a lot of it is just to do with the base idea of just moving around a world, killing things, getting XP in the Castlevania style, because that one was more of a Castlevania style one, I guess. Leveling up and just exploring a space and filling out a map, and getting movement abilities to where you're eventually getting quite fast across this space. And I had a really good time with After Image and enjoyed it a lot. And I was like, what's another like mid-ish Metroidvania that I got access to that I should just play? Oh yes, F.I.S.T. Forged in Shadow Torch. So F.I.S.T., I guess it's what's the word for it? Where it's not an acronym, but it is not italicization. It's you know what the word is for it, but it's like F.I.S.T. is F.I.S.T. basically. Terrible name for a video game. And so they call it F.I.S.T. Forged in Shadow Torch, which again doesn't mean fucking anything. Anyway, this is a Metroidvania where you play as a rabbit. Now, you say that, but like this is actually a cool rabbit, okay?
An abbreviation.
I guess it is an abbreviation.
An abbreviation is a truncated word, and an acronym is made up of parts of the phrase it stands for.
Right, so it wouldn't be an abbreviation. It's like NATO, right, where you can say it as a word. That is a different thing.
Is it an initialism?
Initialism, that's the fucking one, initialism.
Okay, right, there we go.
So you've got abbreviation, you've got initialisms. Anyway, because fist you say is a word. So anyway, there's a whole thing. Regardless, so you're playing as this rat, right? Okay, so it is this kind of cyberpunky dystopian world where the citizens are all animals, but they're anthropomorphized animals, right? They're called furtisans, and so you have rabbits who like walk like people, and you got cats, and you've got this bear character. There's a raccoon.
These are quite photorealistic animals. These
Yeah,
aren't just
yeah.
like your cartoony kind of things.
There is a slight stylization to it, but for the most part, yeah, it's going for a more realistic look, a more kind of gritty, grounded look. And so it's like this rabbit, he talks like a gruff fucking action hero, essentially. He's like, oh, I'm a Rayton. I was in the military, and I'm now a fucking rabbit who goes and kills people. And like, he was like a retired military rabbit. And the fist part comes in is because they have these like mechanized things that go on them, and his mechanized weapon is this like giant fucking metal fist, essentially, that like is attached to his arm, but like extends and like becomes this giant thing.
Your standard Metroidvania weapon.
Exactly. It's a big old thing, and it's very satisfying to use, and you punch people with it, and you do stuff. So I would say overall this game is pretty janky in a lot of ways. Like, it feels like it has... It feels like a game trying to be higher budget than it actually is, in the sense that it has like full voice acting, it has like these 3D cutscenes and stuff, and it is this 2.5D style thing. So it's not a pure 2D Metroidvania. It is 2.5D in the fact that sometimes the camera perspective changes a little bit, and sometimes it zooms out, and you are using a little bit of 3D movement back and forth. Like, there's a section where you're going up this elevator shaft, and there are fans spinning, and you need to like move in a 3D kind of space in order to avoid like the fans, essentially. But then for the most part, for the rest of it, you are just purely on a 2D side-scrolling plane. So it does some interesting stuff where it mixes it up, but yeah, it feels like the combat is fun enough, but it has like a bit of jank to it in terms of the movement. When you dash is very stop and start. The like just jumping about, it does feel good, but like there's something that kind of leaves you wanting.
How combat versus traversal focused is the game?
I would say it's very combat focused generally. Okay. Like, it feels like a game where, so it has a skill tree, and in the skill tree you can learn a bunch of different moves. So like, you know, like in Bayonetta where it's like X, 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 Y, or X, Y, Y, X, Y. Like, it kind of has a little bit of character action stuff in that way, where like you will unlock a move that is, okay, do 3 light attacks and then a heavy. So it's like X and Y is light and heavy attacks, essentially. And you mix those up within combat to do different moves. You also have a special meter that you can use special moves, and those will drain that away. You also have an item system where you get these items that you can use a... kind of, it's more like Dark Souls Estus Flask, where the first one you get is carrot juice, obviously, because you're a rabbit, so you heal yourself with carrot juice, and so your carrot juice flask has 3 charges to it. I think you actually only start with 2 charges, but you start with these 2 charges, which means you can heal yourself twice. You then get a couple of other abilities that you can swap out for that healing thing. This is one of those things I don't like in games like this, is the healing thing should be a default thing that you always have access to. The fact that I have to swap out my healing thing to use like an auto parry or another thing that does damage, I really don't like that, because I'm never going to take that option, especially in a boss fight. I'm never going to move away from my healing flask as my main thing, because I always want to have access, especially at the game like this where the combat does get quite challenging. I don't ever want to switch away from that. So it's a little frustrating that they offer you these gadgets, they're called, and you have 4 of them across the game, but the only one I ever used was the healing flask, because like, why would I ever switch away from that, right? So there's that, which is governed by its own thing. And so yeah, you have a little bit of different stuff to play around with. You collect a currency as you kill enemies. There's not got experience in a traditional way, but you collect a currency and use that currency to upgrade your skill tree. And you get these data discs as well that you collect. And yeah, I think overall the game is pretty compelling. I was surprised by how like interesting the world ended up being and some of the stuff going on with it. I think it's kind of one of those games where I didn't pay too much attention to the story. Like, I'm skipping things here and there. I'm mainly just watching the cutscenes when they come up. But it was cool, and I think just the idea of this kind of noir cyberpunky world with anthropomorphic animals that are kind of gritty is fun, and I think they do a good job kind of building it out and all the locations and stuff like that. And it feels like they have this good like system of getting around the place. There's fast travel spots where you kind of go into this hamster ball and it rolls you around to like your next location. I think AM2R had a system that was like that, where you would roll into the morph ball, and the fast travel system would use the morph ball to like throw you through pipes to get to different areas. So it kind of does that idea. But I think interesting, like Monkey Ball and this kind of come up in the same episode, because I think they both have this thing, which is you come up against these big challenges, whether they be boss fights or like waves of enemies, and there's a real tenacity to it. Like, you have kind of, as I said, like you have decent-ish movement options. Like you have an air dash, you have a double jump, and you have like a wall jump as well. But like I would say early on, you have a little less of those abilities, and so it's harder to kind of move around and to get about the place. And there's moments, I think the places where it gets most frustrating is when they throw a bunch of enemies at you, like a wave of them, and some of them are ranged and some of them melee, and it's just, you kind of get knocked into this state of just being stun locked a little bit, where it's like, oh, there's so many enemies to deal with this, and my attacks don't do enough damage, and I just have to keep hitting people, and so it just there's a bit of a war of attrition to take down some of these like bigger waves of enemies, and you just sometimes get into these situations where you're just like locked in place, and just feels frustrating a little bit more so than anything else. But when it comes down to like the boss fights, a lot of them they have a lot of attacks they do, and it's a lot of learning of like, okay, what's he going to do, is winding up this. And by the time I got to the end, like I started this back in like, I want to say January, maybe February this year. And I got like 3 or 4 hours in, and then it was literally on Friday night, I was like, I should get back to that. And so Friday night, I just started playing it, and I just really got into the groove of exploring around the space, like just continuing the story, fighting a bunch of enemies and bosses, and I played it for like 4 hours straight, and I was like, wow, that's a lot. And I think this is the thing I'm talking about, is like Metroidvanias, there's something about them that just captures me and just makes me just like want to stay with them. And so I did that, and then I was like, oh, I'm probably close-ish to the end. I looked up on YouTube, I was like, oh, I'm like very close to the end. So this morning I went through and spent the entire morning just going through it. And this morning was just like, I had 3 big bosses. So I did a boss fight, and I was like, that surely is the last boss. And then there was a whole section after it. I was like, oh no, the last boss is going to be something real rough if that was the not last boss. So yeah, I ended up fighting the last boss for like 40 minutes straight, but it's one of those where it's super satisfying because you're learning this move set, you're getting better, you are just executing, and you know the exact thing the enemy's going to do, to the point where by the end I was able to do it without even using any of my heals, because I had just learned it to avoid all the moves. And that is a real satisfying thing I find in these games. Sometimes Metroidvanias, I like them more for the exploration and for the movement and all that sort of stuff. And some of the games, I think like Dread is probably the best epitome of one that does everything correctly, which is movement satisfying, exploration satisfying, and combat satisfying. I would say this does every one of those things decently, right? But the combat feels like it's the thing that has the edge, and that's the thing that I derived the most satisfaction, was fighting those really tough bosses and like being like, oh man, I don't know if I'm actually going to do this, but then slowly learning them and eventually getting to that point where you're dodging everything and you're not being hit by anything, which is extremely satisfying. You get these different weapons as you go through. So the fist is the main one. You then get a drill, which is really cool because these weapons can work a little bit multi-purpose. The drill is used underwater as a thing to like make you go faster. You can also use it in like air ducts in the air as like a glider as well. So that has a bit of purpose to it. And then I unlocked the final weapon, which is a electric whip, which has a lot bigger range on it, so you can hit enemies from further away. And also has this thing where you kind of like charge it up, and then when you do the heavy move, it shoots a bunch of bolts, kind of like missile bolts, electricity at the enemy as well. And so I ended up using that whip for most of the boss fights in the back half. And yeah, it was just very, very satisfying to pull that stuff off.
You sound a lot hotter than your 4 out of 10 spiel at the start, right?
Yes, yeah. I think this is definitely... I don't know. I think this game is like probably for most people fine. Like I think most people would...
But do you know what they got on OpenCritic?
I don't. I'm guessing 70 something. I want to say like 73 or something maybe.
Got an 80.
Did it? Okay, yeah. All right. So actually, people maybe like it more than I give it credit for. But yeah, I don't know. It's not like a 9 out of 10 gotta go play it type of Metroidvania. But I think it is just very solid all across the board. And like, yes, a lot of it feels jank, and like there's moments of frustration of like, there are some slow puzzles where you are kind of like using your fist to grab this thing. It's like a lamp or whatever, or like I don't know, it's like an energy cell. Like you're grabbing this energy cell, and when you are holding the energy cell, you walk slowly and you can jump still, but you can't really dash or do any of that stuff. And so you're slowly like walking past these enemies, and you're supposed to get to this point where you hit a checkpoint with it, and so that if you die, you just start from there, and then you'll be able to like grab or if the lantern gets destroyed, or the energy cell gets destroyed, it will respawn at a further along point. And there was a moment today where I got to that respawn point, and it didn't respawn there, and I had to go all the way back to the beginning of it and bring it all the way back round. So that stuff is frustrating because it is like just the kind of bugginess showing, like the kind of jankiness showing in there, which you're going to get. And I think especially with a game like this, it's trying to punch a lot above its weight, and you're going to run into stuff like that quite frequently. But yeah, like I said, just like this and Afterimage, I had a great time with both of them. They're both probably like 6 or 7 out of 10s really at the end of the day, but I think there's good stuff in both, and I was satisfied playing them, and I had a good time. And like I said, I think I played 4.5 hours since February, whatever. I just hadn't picked it back up again, and I finished at 11 hours. So I put like 7 hours into it in the last day, essentially. Jeez. Which is quite a lot. It didn't feel like that much, because I feel like, when I'm doing Metroidvanias, I just have this thing where I just keep going with them, and I just don't put it down. I'm just like, oh, well, I just need to get to the next area just to see. And I end up going through that entire area without meaning to, It's that sort of thing that just compels me about it. So, Forged in Shadow Torch. You can check it out. It's on Switch. The Switch version, I think, is... again, probably doesn't run the greatest in the world because it is a 2.5D kind of pseudo 3D game on Switch. But it'll run at 30ish frame rate wise, and is still, from what I've seen, a decent-ish port of the game. But
what's the weirdest anthropomorphic animal in the game?
Oh gosh, there's a bull guy who's pretty cool. I guess bulls aren't that weird because they're basically minotaurs, right? At the end of the day, the bear is pretty cool. There's a raccoon. There's a rat. Okay, so there's this rat motherfucker who's like the king of the rats or whatever. He's like a businessman. He's a businessman rat who's just like sitting in his business chair.
It's too easy. Too easy.
It is too easy. But then you have to do a boss fight with him where you fight him in his wheelchair, and he's just like going around, and it's like kind of a joke of a boss fight, and then he gets into a giant mech and starts like kicking your ass. And that was cool. But yeah, I don't know. They don't go too crazy with it. There is, of course, a sexy cat because that's how it goes. If you're gonna do like, the game opens with the sequence of this sexy cat like running through the city, like she's got tight leather jeans on, like they're trying to, and like she calls the rabbit Silly Bunny. She's like, oh, Silly Bunny, and it's like, okay, all right, I see what you're trying to do here. It's really stupid though, because it feels like it's undercutting her character, because her character's kind of cool, but then they like sexualize her in a way. I don't know, it just feels bad. So yeah, you got that obviously. But yeah, the rabbit's pretty cool. I'd say he's probably the coolest. And obviously, like, the evil villain is another evil rabbit, but with an even bigger mech suit and an even bigger fist. So yeah, it's kind of stupid at the end of the day, but I think what it says is that give NBZ an average Metroidvania and he will be content for the rest of his life. So that's pretty much it. So that's 3 off the list this year. That I did Prince of Persia, Afterimage, this. I downloaded Blasphemous. I bought that on Nintendo Switch. Nice. I got that ready to go. So that one I know a lot of people really like. Want to play Blasphemous. Ender Lilies is on my hit list as well. I would like to get to Ender Lilies.
It's got that sequel coming out this year,
yes,
or maybe next year. I don't know.
Yeah, it's already out in early access, the sequel, right. But I don't know if it will be.
Critic.
Yeah, I don't know if that will be finished anytime soon. And then there's another one. Oh yes, Gestalt, Steam and Cinder.
Oh yeah.
That is a game I've been waiting for years. Comes out in 3 days. It comes out on Tuesday. I didn't realize.
I think that's another one I've got in my fantasy critic.
Right.
Actually.
Yeah. So I'm looking forward to. Hopefully playing. Hopefully that's good. I played the demo and I didn't love the demo of it a couple of years ago. So hopefully it is good. It turns out well because it looks really, really nice visually. So, but yeah, I've made it my mission by this year to play as many Metroidvanias as I can. So
it's a good genre.
Yeah, so. It is. It's the best. Nice. Some might say. So there you go. All right, well, that is going to do us for the first part of today's show. Don't go anywhere, though, because we'll be back after the break with some of your emails to answer and respond. See you in a bit.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the second part of today's show. It is time for emails. As we said at the top of the show, we do need some more emails. It is the well it was moist, now it's dry.
Yeah.
So if you would like to send an email to the show, please email ThisNintendoLife@gmail.com. That's ThisNintendoLife@gmail.com. As I said before, we have a channel on our Discord server. It is called Emails. So pop a question in there and we'd be glad to answer it. Our first email this time, this was from Discord. It's from Jasmine. And I will say this was quite a while ago, but I think it's worth discussing because it's quite an important topic. And Jasmine says, hello guys, not sure if this has already been discussed on the podcast yet, but thought it would be a great discussion point. The 3DS and Wii U online services are set to shut at 23:59 on the 8th of April, and I'm curious to hear your guys' thoughts on this topic. Back in 2014, the DS and Wii servers shut down, but that was due to the company hosting the servers shutting down. This time, it's purely Nintendo's decision. What are your guys' thoughts on why the decision was made? The obvious thought is that the servers are expensive to maintain and not often used anymore, but I'm curious if you guys agree. Do you think that eventually the same thing will happen with the Switch servers despite us now paying for it? Has the impending closure affected how you play the never-ending backlog for fear of missing features in the future? Forgive the many questions. I'm just very curious to hear your thoughts. Keep up the great show. Jasmine from Leicester in the UK.
Lovely. Yeah, I guess it was April this year that happened, right? I want to say that was the case because they obviously, when it comes to shutdowns, it comes to different phases, and so there was the phase of shutting down the eShop on 3DS and Wii U, and then it was the phase of, okay, now you can't spend any money anymore because all the currency is going to be stopped, and then it was you can still download stuff though. I'm pretty sure with Wii as well, you can still download stuff that you had bought, like that part of the service still exists. But in terms of, or maybe that's completely gone now for Wii and DS.
You definitely can't buy new stuff.
No. So for Wii and DS, actually, there was the whole thing where people were downloading things physically because they were completely going away because you couldn't actually re-download stuff anymore, right? Which I think you still can re-download stuff for 3DS and Wii U, I want to say. Maybe not. Okay, I'm not 100% certain on those, but anyway, we got to the point where it was the online service side of this, which is, hey, you're playing Mario Kart 7 online, or you're playing whatever Wii U game.
1.
Trine 2 multiplayer,
Trine
of course,
2.
yes. Yeah, whatever multiplayer service there was.
Metroid Prime Federation Force.
Of course, yeah. So there was a lot of different games that had been affected on both 3DS and Wii U in terms of online functionality just going away. So I guess like why this happens is, I mean, there's a lot of factors that go into it, right? I think cost of upkeeping the server is something that is definitely the most present when it comes to companies because they're always looking at ways to cut costs if they can, and I feel like Nintendo try and do that as much as possible, as being kind of a lean company as they are. They want to make as much money, spend as little as they can, and I think that's definitely a factor. I think the other thing was maintaining these takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of effort, and in terms of like payment systems and stuff, I can't remember what podcast I was listening to, may have been RFN, but they're talking about like how the payment systems on these kind of like back ends need to be updated with the way that like cards and banks are all sorted out, so it becomes a bit of a nightmare to keep that going over an extended period of time, basically, and like you're stuck to the payment method way that it was set up in the first place, and so there's lots of kind of weird things to jump through to get that working, and so yeah, I think this is inevitable that it happens. Sometimes, like, I believe when Sony were like, we're going to shut down the PS3 and Vita shops, people were like, no, you're not, and there was a backlash, and Sony actually listened to the backlash and like, okay, we won't do it, which is interesting. But I think that there is an inevitability to this, to where eventually that is going to go away because it just doesn't make sense anymore to maintain this stuff. So yeah, I don't know how you feel about it, Valley. Obviously, like losing online functionality and accessibility, I think it just kind of like it makes a game lesser, or you lose like the history of what that was in a sense.
I think you're being a little bit generous to Nintendo that like, oh, they are trying to keep these things, but if only they had a bit more money and resources, they would would keep them all open. And I think that there's so little money back or benefit to them back financially that they just don't bother. And I think that Nintendo don't want us playing old games. If we're playing old games, that means we're not buying new games. And obviously
the whole thing about like, why are they not putting Smash on like the virtual console or whatever? It's like, oh well, because they want you to buy the new one. Same with Mario Kart. It's like, where's Mario Kart 64? Oh well, you got to buy the brand new Mario Kart.
Those online games are a great example, whether it's Splatoon, Mario Kart, or Smash. They want you playing the new one, not the old one. And I just think that, if it's one of those things where Nintendo do like you to play old games, but only if you're playing their selection of old games that they've now got on their monthly payment system with Switch Online. That's how they want you to play old games. They don't really love it that we own GameCubes and are playing Smash Melee and going to tournaments and playing Smash Melee and not promoting Smash Ultimate. Like, there's just that kind of level of, we want you to play the new games. But the silly thing about that logic is that there are huge gaps in entire consoles, like mainly the GameCube, that just, those games are not playable anywhere else other than the GameCube, barring some exceptions like Mario Sunshine, Luigi's Mansion, like games that have been ported and remade, and that's it. And it's one of these things where I think the proof is in the pudding, where I believe this is true. I did look this up and I was verified, but Nintendo briefly removed Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze from the Wii U when they released the remake on Nintendo Switch.
That is correct.
It is evident that they don't want you playing their old systems. So when you know that such a big part of the company doesn't even want you playing the old games, the idea that that same company would spend money to keep us being able to play old games is for the birds, in my view. Like, I just think they are making 99.9% of their money through the Mario film and selling Switch games and Nintendo Switches, and the 0.0000001% of money they're making from people buying Wii U games and 3DS games and DLC for those games. I just think there is a big enough cost for them where it's about the idea that, hey, I don't want to play Splatoon 1 anymore on my Wii U. I guess I'm finally going to have to buy Splatoon 3. Look at me and you, MBZ. We finally picked up Mario Kart 8 on the Nintendo Switch. That was
finally
last year. And, or the year before, can't remember. But we bought that game day one in 2013? 2014. Yeah. That game, we got it day one back in the Wii U. And Nintendo punished us by saying we now have a new version of that game when you can't get the DLC on the Wii U.
Right.
So because they want us to buy the game on their current system. I think there will be so many examples of this question on the Switch too. I think a great example will be Mario Kart. Let's say Mario Kart launches in either the launch of the Switch 2 or the launch window, which I think is quite likely. You watch the way in which they wrap up Mario Kart 8 in a weird way, or they don't discount that game at all, which is pretty predictable. But there'll be weird things they do that make sure that the current Mario Kart is the Mario Kart, and that you shouldn't be going back to the old Mario Kart, because that's not how they make money, basically.
It's a really interesting question as well, right? Because the constant chat about backwards compatibility that's going around, what did Nintendo do in a world where they've made a backward compatible console to a system where 60 million people own a Mario Kart already? And is there a tangible reason for them to buy a new one? Like, either Nintendo have to so this could be a good thing, because this could force Nintendo's hand to like be more innovative and be more kind of different with their new games, because if they are having Smash carryover and Mario Kart carryover from a backwards compatibility standpoint, they're then forced creatively to come up with something different and interesting, and those, especially in those iterative style games like Splatoon as well, right? Trying to make something completely different. That said, we already have an example of this where Splatoon 3 and Splatoon 2 are practically the same video game, but they still didn't have much of a problem releasing both. I don't think Nintendo did much to suppress Splatoon 2 in terms of like making people try and buy 3 instead. So maybe I'm thinking a bit too hard about it, but I don't know. It feels like there is a looming threat there of just, like we said, of like the way that games are these days, of games just last for years and years. Stardew Valley this year hit a peak concurrent player amount with the 1.6 update. Like more people were playing it this year than have in the last 10 years. It's a game that came out 10 years ago, right? It's mad, absolutely mad. So I feel like there is a bit of a danger that they would perceive from that angle. But yeah, I don't know what they would do. Like the safest thing would be not do backwards compatibility for them, but they know that's going to go down very poorly with people if they choose to do that.
I think also you look at, it's taken actually a very long time for a system as unsuccessful as the Wii U to have its servers shut down. Like it's taken close to or a decade, or just over a decade. And when you think about the number of sales of the Switch, I do think it'll probably be a longer period of time, potentially.
It depends on their infrastructure, right?
Yeah.
Like if the online infrastructure on the successor system is similar enough, then it could be something that they carry over. And I think with their account, they've talked about the account system carrying over. If that's the case, then it may well be that this stuff lasts a lot longer than we expect it to, because I think the reason these things have shut down in the past is things were less interconnected. These days, though, like with Xbox and with PlayStation, you have your account from like 2005 on like the PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360, right, when those consoles first came out, and that stuff has kind of been carried through the whole time. Obviously it doesn't seem like that's the case because they are looking at shutting down those old like storefronts and stuff like that, but you would think that this would make it last a little bit longer. You'd hope so anyway. If they're carrying that stuff through. And
it's this horrendous game of let's try and predict the digital future. It's a very, very difficult game to play. If you think back even 10 years ago to all the things we do digitally differently from 10 years ago. 10 years ago, I had like an iTunes library of my personal digital songs. There was no such thing as Disney Plus. I think Amazon Prime was just like launching. Like you think back how much even the world has changed since 10 years ago, and what platforms exist, how they're supported, how we consume media, music, video, etc. Like you tell someone 10 years ago that the YouTube's going to get taken over by YouTube Shorts, they'd be like, Shorts? You mean like Vines? Vines didn't take off, so why on earth would they come back? It's like, no, because there's this platform called TikTok, and everyone's trying to keep up with TikTok, including the biggest video service out there, YouTube, and like. You just think to how much websites, platforms change in 10 years, and games consoles are part of this discussion. So Nintendo, who by all accounts technologically are playing catch up more often than not with the higher end systems, they're already, trying to play this mad game of catch up, and ultimately they just want to sell fun experiences to families and they want to work out what's the best way of doing that.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess, like, do you feel like we are missing something from this stuff going away at this point in time? Obviously, there's very few people online right now playing, or was in, the beginning of this year playing, let's say, Mario Kart 7 online. There'll still be a community of people doing it. Same with Splatoon 1, right? Like, there is a community of people. I think, actually, there's a news story. The last player to still be connected to Splatoon 1 got disconnected recently or something. Like, how do you feel about that, like, from a kind of player perspective or preservation perspective?
I am very guilty of my personal tastes in video game news, being very invested in stuff like the Game Awards, Game of the Year discussions, doing this podcast. We do our own Game of the Year discussions. I've become a very big fan of the latest hotness. Now, that's not to say I don't play old games, because we obviously have our Game of the Year that didn't actually come out this year lists. GOTY to GOTY is a big part of this show. We both enjoy playing old games. You definitely play more old games than I do, but I rarely go back and play old games that are deep cuts. Like, the old games that I play are normally very successful indies or big games that have either been remade or are easily accessible through something like Nintendo Switch Online. So when stuff like servers and these kinds of things are shut down, it rarely impacts me directly, and I would always take what I'm saying about these things with a pinch of salt, because it definitely doesn't affect me as much as collectors and people who purely only play retro games, because that is still a big part of the community, you know. So
Right.
like, I'm definitely guilty of leaning towards the hotness. So I always have far too much faith in Nintendo to re-release and remake games that I missed that I would be interested in. A good example is like Mario RPG. That game we were going to play as part of Backlog Club. I think we are still going to play it at some point, and we're probably now going to play the remake of that game because, you know, we want to experience the latest hotness version of that classic game. I think the Paper Mario games are another example with that remake. Like, that's just kind of how I roll at the moment, and for good and for bad. I think the good side of it is, hey, I get to play pretty much everything on modern systems, and that's always a nice luxury, because in line with this discussion, those systems are updated the most and things are kept, you know, running the best. But the downside is that, yeah, I'm kind of just looking at one small part of the wider video game history, and I think it is important that we have access to all these other games for sure.
Yeah, I mean, like, for example, I mean, we did play a game that we knew would be affected by this, which is Metro Prime Federation Force, right? Like,
Yeah.
I think there was an impetus behind us getting on that and doing it, because we knew this was coming. We knew this was inevitable, that eventually that Nintendo would be like, well, we're going to shut down the online service. And so last year, we're like, all right, let's get people together, let's do this, let's play through Metro Prime Federation Force the way it was meant to, online, co-op, and it was great, and I'm so glad we had that experience. And now we can never do it again. If we ever want to replay Metro Prime Federation Force with a group of people, guess what? You have to get into a room with real people and do that, you know? Same thing goes for Triforce Heroes. If we ever want to replay Triforce Heroes, we can't just do that. We can't just get out of 3DS and be like, let's replay. Let's say we're going to do our ranking of Zeldas and we want to go back and like remember a little bit of how Triforce Heroes was. It's impossible. It's not allowed anymore unless we like get in a room. So that stuff, especially when it's a game that is purely focused on online, which to be fair, there's not a lot of those on 3DS and Wii U, but there are, you know, a couple of first-party examples there, a Metroid and a Zelda game that are just unplayable now. Like, you can't go back and have that experience anymore, which is, I think, a tragedy and really, really, really bad. Obviously, there's some games that you hope come back in some form, right? Like, there's a significant part of Xenoblade Chronicles X that is focused on online and trading resources with people online and all that sort of stuff. And I think eventually we'll get that game again, but if you want to play it in its current form, you're losing out on a huge amount with it, and like not having access to that stuff really does suck, because it makes the game longer and harder as a result of not having access to the online features. And yeah, there's definitely plenty examples. Like Kid Icarus Uprising is a game that's never been re-released yet and is a weird one and had a pretty thriving online community of competitive players who are playing that game significantly. Splatoon 1, I still think, is a very interesting, differentiated version of Splatoon. Has some of the best maps, a lot of which didn't come over.
Like the simplicity of those maps.
Exactly, yeah, and we don't have those, and so until Nintendo decides to bring those maps back or put them into the next Splatoon game, there's no way to play those anymore, right? And so I think it does suck, and I think we are guilty, and I think a lot of people are guilty of just playing new stuff all the time, or just like when you're playing an online game, you're generally playing something that is more active and current. So if you're going to play Mario Kart, you're going to be playing Mario Kart 8. If you're playing Smash Bros., you're playing Smash Ultimate, and I think that there are some people, it's a very small number of people, but there are still dedicated communities who are the people who are on Discord playing Kid Icarus Uprising in groups every weekend or whatever, right? And it's a shame that that game is just gone, right? Like you paid money for it, you got it, now you just can't play it in the way that you used to be able to anymore, which I think it really sucks. And I think also just puts this ticking time bomb on it, right? Like, we were forced to play Metro Prime Federation Force. We couldn't just sit there and wait to play it because we knew that eventually we wouldn't be able to. And I think that will eventually start biting us in the ass when it comes to these more modern consoles, where it's like so many games are online these days. Like, most games are online, and there are going to be so many, like, okay, well, I can never play this again. We're already seeing it with games getting shut down, like Rumbleverse, or what was the dodgeball one? Like
Dodgeball Academia?
No. That's the RPG.
Oh,
that we
sorry,
played.
you're thinking of.
I think you're the one that Blessing always talks about.
Blessing
Kind of
loves
funny. Yeah, like it's stuff like that, right? That's already shut down. The server is gone. Like what happened? Like Destiny 1. I guess you can still play Destiny 1 if you want, but like eventually that game will just not exist because its entire infrastructure is online. Like Fortnite, when eventually the heat death of the universe comes and Fortnite doesn't exist anymore, you'll never be able to play that game again because it's purely online. It's all it is.
It was Knockout City.
Knockout City, that's the one, right? And so like we live in an era where the very fabric of video games are online, and so when those eventually go, you just lose the history of video games. It's just gone. Which is
especially when you think like the trend at the moment, especially this year, even amongst like first party developer, or I guess it's maybe the second party with Helldivers 2 and Sony.
Yes.
There is a trend to moving towards online multiplayer because everyone wants to be the next Fortnite, and there is an appetite for it. And we're not there yet, but you know, some might argue that the single player adventure story driven open world game is on the decline while the online multiplayer game is on the rise. So one of those ages a lot better than the other because you can go back and play an open world game as long as it runs on the system you're playing on. You know, like it's not relying on the internet online.
Yeah, unless you're one of those companies like Ubisoft who requires you to be connected online for a game that's purely offline, but that's a whole separate can of worms. I think it's kind of scary, and I think it will affect this generation and the generations going forward far more than it has the ones we've currently gone through, especially on Nintendo's side, just because there weren't that many significant online games for those platforms, and the ones that were ones that like have iterations to them that will be sequelized and put out there so that you can play the latest version of it for the most part, right?
I mean, I think it's even kind of wild that in 2024 we still have physical video game media. Like it's the last bastion between video, music, and video games that like music and video, like DVDs or Blu-rays, like they're almost completely dead.
Nobody does that.
So in 10 years' time, it's probably just going to be a handful of video games. Will physical video games be here in 10 years' time? I'd argue there's probably going to be some, but it kind of depends on what the big companies say about whether they want to put a disc drive or a cartridge slot in their system or not. So yeah, I mean, I think the Switch 2 will have a cartridge slot, but
totally,
we'll see.
Yeah, and I don't know. I mean, whether it's affected my playing of backlog stuff. Like as I talked about on the show, I bought a bunch of 3DS games, and like some of those involved going to the eShop and like figuring out the way to pay, like to get the DLC for Spirit of Justice, the 6th Ace Attorney game. You have to go through the menu on the game, not through the eShop itself, which is a whole like process to get that. Like there's stuff like the daily puzzles in like certain games that would not activate anymore. Like I think there was a couple on 3DS. I can't remember if there was the Layton ones. I think Layton games on 3DS had the thing where they'd have these daily puzzles and you wouldn't be able to activate those anymore. So if you ever wanted to go back through the history of playing those, there's just a bunch of puzzles that you're purely locked out of because they can't ping for an internet connection anymore. Even though I believe a lot of that stuff is available on the cartridge, it still just doesn't let you have access to it because it's tied to an online ping thing. So eventually when I get to those Layton games, I just won't be able to have that full experience. And not that I would want to, because I'd probably just play the main game and get out of there. But I think for a lot of people that is something that sucks. And yeah, I just can't do any of that stuff anymore, right? The time has passed. The online thing is closed now. And so if I suddenly am like, oh man, I'm really enjoying Theater Rhythm on 3DS, can I get the Chrono Trigger songs? Oh wait, no, because the store is shut, so I can't buy them anymore, right? They're just gone. And I'm kind of regretting that at the moment because I really like the touchscreen stuff on Theater Rhythm on 3DS and how that works, and I can't buy any of those songs anymore. They're just gone. So unless I want to turn to piracy, which is certainly a thing you can do, then yeah, it's all disappeared. That said, I do think there are efforts out there for people to bring these things back. I believe there's lots of fan-run servers for a lot of these games, and there's a lot of hoops you have to jump through and doing homebrew setups and things like that. But there are ways that people are keeping them alive, as much as it is kind of like on the edges and the peripheral. There will still be ways to play these games online, because communities, that's what they do, right? They just keep things going, and I think that will continue to be a niche but still potentially accessible thing if you have the right hardware and know what to do and do all this stuff. So yeah, it's interesting.
But great question, Jasmine. We will definitely come back to this question, I feel like, in the next few years, because it's just going to keep coming back around. And we'll see when all the Switch stuff is eventually shut down, but I think it'll be a long time, but who knows?
I think so.
Our next question is from Ali T from the Discord server. Hi guys, on and off listener over the years, long-suffering friend, speak for yourself, loving the podcast at the moment on my commute to work, now to the point where I think of you guys chatting every time I pass certain streets on the commute, whether I'm listening to you or not. Thus, my question is, are there any memorable places you frequent that remind you of a podcast you were listening to, or vice versa? P.S. Looking forward to using the Switch Up projector next year when it comes out.
Yes,
that's a reference to MBZ's prediction that the Switch 2 will have a projector, and you will be able to play games on your wall.
This is the funny thing, is I tend to, every time I make a prediction, forget. This is the one that just keeps coming back up and I get reminded of, because people keep talking about it. So yes, I'll look forward to it. It's going to be exciting. We're gonna get some Switch 2 announcement later this year, and we'll finally figure out what the hell that thing is. But this is an interesting question, because I do think that, as people who listen to a lot of podcasts, there's definitely associations that I have between certain podcasts, certain episodes of podcasts, and sometimes locations, more often than not games that I'm playing while listening to podcasts and things like that. I know that back in the day, a lot of people talked about having like music, like they were playing a song while playing a certain game, and so that was a permanent like association for them and stuff like that. But yeah, there's definitely a few that come to mind for me. I always associate being on the London Underground. I listen to podcasts a lot on there, but I associate most of all that I have this vivid memory of being on the London Underground, going to, I think, a work experience thing, and listening to the Giant Bombcast, and the Giant Bombcast saying that they had a sale on premium memberships, and I was like, oh shit, I need to get on premium membership. And so on that train, I got onto my phone, went to the Giant Bomb website, and signed up for Giant Bomb Premium so that I could watch Metal Gear Scanlan, which I'd been meaning to do, and I was waiting for...
So they've just put on YouTube the whole thing, apparently.
They just did. They just put all of those as like giant 20-hour videos for each of those series onto YouTube, which is very cool. I'm glad that they are keeping that around and preserving it, relevant to the previous question. So yeah, that's very, very cool. But yeah, I have a very distinct memory of the Bombcast saying, by the way, premium it was one of those funny ads that like Gersman and Brad and stuff would do at the start, and they'd do their small businessman. I think Vinny and Gersman did their small businessman bit, which was my favorite ad segment of anything of all time. It's just incredible stuff.
I think the Around the World beef is like the highlight of that. But yeah, I have a distinct memory of being on the London Underground, hearing them say premium memberships are on, and me going and doing that instantly. And I guess the Bombcast just is a podcast I listened to for so long, but has been associated with a lot of different places. I associate the Australian beef specifically with a walk that I did to Tesco in I think I was in Glasgow. And Pokemon X and Y was coming out, and I was like, I need to get this, because it was going to arrive and I needed it for Pokemon stuff. And so I remember taking this long walk to a Tesco that was really far away, and as I was walking, I was listening to the email segment of the Australian beef stuff happening. And it just stuck in my brain of like walking there to get Pokemon X and Y while listening to this Australian beef. I think you also like was texting me about it as I was listening to it at the same time, and so it was this weird thing of just this pure association. That one sticks with me pretty strongly as well. And I also remember the very first time I listened to the Giant Bombcast, I was in my living room in Edinburgh, and I remember having it on a speaker up on the above the fireplace, and remember listening to it and thinking,
they're not talking about video games, they're just talking about energy drinks. What is this show? Like, I just hadn't got into the Bombcast yet, and I was like trying to figure out who people were, and I kind of actually bounced off the Bombcast the first time I listened to it, doing that, and then I eventually came back to it and got into it and all that sort of stuff. But yeah, lots of Bombcast associated memories, I guess, I have with certain places and certain things in my life, so that's definitely a big one.
I think it was kind of the first podcast that wasn't Radio Free Nintendo or Weekend Confirmed that I feel like you got me into.
Yes,
was, I kind of got into it just after Ryan Davis died in summer 2013.
I think so.
Yeah, I find this question really hard because it's kind of like Ali T saying, remember what you were doing when you were breathing? Or something like, podcasts are just so like... in my ears life, right? All the time. Yeah, because I think Ali T's one of these people who like only listens to podcasts at specific times, like you're saying. On his commute, that's the one time he listens to podcasts. It's like, no. Ali T, that is a rookie. That is a rookie thing to do. You'll be listening to a podcast in one particular part of your life. You want to be podcasting as much as you are sleeping, according to our podcasting stats. Yeah. So yeah, I do find this question very hard from that perspective. For those who don't know, I'm big into my running. I've done 5 marathons. I'll admit my running has taken a slight backseat since Bally Junior came into the world. I'm not running quite as far and fast as I once was. But I still run a lot. I still listen to a lot of podcasts while running. And I distinctly remember trying out Easy Allies on a specific route I ran in Brussels. And it was a 20-mile route, which works out at like 32k-ish for kilometer thinkers. And there's this point in this forest near Brussels, and it just keeps going straight into the forest for like 6 miles straight. And I remember listening to Easy Allies thinking, this is a really good podcast. And I just kind of wanted... I don't listen to Easy Allies anymore, and obviously that like their makeup of who's on the show has changed quite dramatically since this was back in 2016, I want to say.
Right.
And yeah, but the reason I remember it was Easy Allies was I haven't always listened to Easy Allies. I only really listened to them like that summer because I was training for the marathon in Brussels, and I was getting through all of my podcasts, and I was saying to you, MB, they're like, I need some more podcasts to listen to because I'm getting through all my existing podcasts. God,
yeah.
So Easy Allies were like this temporary substitute that unfortunately did not stand the test of time. And yeah, so I'll be honest, aside from that, I really genuinely struggle to like remember specific places because all of them in my head are running routes. And because I'm on those running routes so consistently, I don't know, it's easy for Ali T. He's listening to one podcast on one route. I'm listening to like 40 different podcasts on 40 different routes over the course of the last 15 years. Like, it's so hard to kind of narrow that down in my mind into being like, right. I mean, it helps me remember so many running routes because I do remember the feeling of listening to podcasts running on all these specific running routes. But yeah, it's just a very weird thing for me to try and think about.
Yeah, I guess I'm kind of different in that way because despite also listening to a lot of podcasts, I do have lots of moments that just spring to mind of like, when you mentioned Weekend Confirmed, I immediately thought of a specific spot in Edinburgh that I was walking, listening to the final episode of Weekend Confirmed. Like, as soon as you said that, I just have this association. It just like jumps to my brain of like, I know exactly where I was standing when I was listening to that final episode of Weekend Confirmed. So there's stuff like that. There's stuff for me actually mainly surrounding playing games and listening to podcasts at the same time. Obviously Giant Bomb Game of the Year is a whole big thing and, you know, very involved and all that sort of stuff, and I have lots of different memories associated. I think the first I remember specifically when Alex Navarro and Patrick Klepek had the whole backstabbing with 3D World and Papers, Please in the 2013 debate. I was in a shopping centre, I believe Blue Water, and we were having lunch, and I think it was a McDonald's or something, or maybe it was KFC, but I remember sitting there listening to this podcast as they were doing that, in that moment in time, the specific moment, talking about this specific debate that was happening, and they were being, and basically Patrick backstabbed Alex, trying to get Papers, Please on the list by sacrificing Mario 3D World. So I remember sitting in that exact spot, listening to that exact episode. Same thing goes for Game of the Year with like playing games at the same time. So I think it was 2018 when I played Valkyria Chronicles, and so I was listening to the Giant Bomb Game of the Year while playing Valkyria Chronicles at the same time. I have a pretty strong association for that. There's just lots of different ones that will pop to mind. Like if you say the name of a podcast, like if you talk about the what was that podcast that we listened to, the fucking UK podcast, I can't remember. Almost came into my brain again.
Who's on it?
They were a group of just like UK guys, and you started listening to them, and you told me about them, and Sheepdog is one of the guys' names, right? Remember that? Sheepdog. Remember the guy called Sheepdog? What? And Mature Gamer, the Mature Gamer podcast. Remember that? Yes, the Mature Gamer podcast.
I remember the name, but I can't remember the people on it.
Right. Anyway, one of the guys called Sheepdog. I think I still follow him on Twitter. That's why.
Okay.
So the Mature Gamer podcast, I remember, I have a very vivid memory of sitting in my bedroom upstairs playing Trine 2 on the Wii U while listening to the Mature Gamer podcast during that era. Again, a podcast that I fell off of now, but has an association with that era as well. I remember listening to the Mature Gamer podcast, going to the park in Edinburgh. What's the one nearby, the big park?
Princess Street Gardens?
No, not Princess. No, the one that's like near our school, the big one. I can't remember.
Oh, Inverleith Park.
Yeah, Inverleith Park. Yeah. So I remember walking through there, listening to the Mature Gamer podcast. I just have these snap memories of just like I just have a very strong association with a particular episode or a particular moment or a particular thing where I was in that place, and it just like kind of like jumps back into my brain, which I don't know what that says about my memory or anything like that, but it's very weird how these kind of particular little moments just stick out to me and just recall. And I remember like a podcast that I used to listen to, or one that I don't listen to anymore, and there's a thing that always goes along with that. So yeah, I remember walking around the museum, I think it was maybe the British Museum, listening to a Retronauts episode. I can't remember what the Retronauts episode was about, but I remember it was Retronauts. So yeah, lots. They just come to me in flashes, and that's how my brain works, I guess. So good question, Ali T. Definitely applies to me a lot.
I'd like Ali T to try listening to the number and breadth of podcasts I listen to, and then answer his own question.
Yeah, he could do it. I'm sure he could. So there you go. Appreciate any podcast related question. Always appreciate that.
Yes,
because then we get to go down a rabbit hole of the weird fucking how deep we are into this shit.
We are quite as much as we're passionate about video games. We're actually very passionate about podcasts. And listening to them. And very turns out we make one. So yeah.
Yeah, no, it's pretty good. Lovely. Well, that's going to do us. But Bally, where can people send their fine emails to?
Please send your fine emails to ThisNintendoLife@gmail.com. That is ThisNintendoLife@gmail.com.
Wunderbar. Please get them in. I'm on my knees.
Do you remember our old email address?
nyppquestions@gmail.com. If you want to email nyppquestions@gmail.com, go ahead. I still have access to that account. Yeah, fun stuff.
The right hipsters are going to go for that one, I can tell.
There you go. Yeah. Oh, actually, there's one more association that I should bring up. I have a strong association of listening to Bally do a solo podcast while I walked around Akihabara in Japan.
Oh, there we go.
Eating my my lunch, eating my my beautiful katsu curry while Bally talked about Mario Golf on Game Boy Color, and then not 10 minutes later walking into Super Potato and seeing a copy of Mario Golf on Game Boy Color. Okay. That was very weird.
This has trained my memory to now memorize Caroline and I in May driving across Ireland and listening to you podcasting about spraying your ass with water in Japan.
Yes.
So that's like another thing that's seared into my mind.
There you go.
For right or wrong, it's there.
Yeah. mainly for wrong, probably. Yes. Well, I was saying something about emails. Yeah, email us, and maybe we'll answer it.
We'd like that.
Yes, you can find us in various places across the internet. We're, of course, supported by a bunch of lovely people over on patreon.com. That's where you can go if you would like to get bonus episodes and fun things. You can support us at patreon.com/ThisNintendoLife. Bally, we would like to thank some of our supporters.
Yes, thank you to our $10 tier plus patrons. They are Zach S, Thomas, Matthew, Albert, Wicked Gamer, UK Alan, Turtle, Orange Thunder, and that guy again, Ali T. Thank you all for your $10 tier plus support. But thank you to all of our other patrons. We really, really, really appreciate all the support that you give this show. It means an awful lot. I think now is a very good time to plug what we will be doing for the month of August on Patreon. So we've just done our July episode. MBZ talked about some Shadow of the Erdtree. I talked about some Hellblade 2. So you can go listen to that episode of This Nintendo Life for a single $1, and that's what the show is about. It's a non-Tendo show, and for those that don't know, we are approaching episode 50, so we've been going for 50 months of This Nintendo Life. You can listen to all 49 episodes for a single $1, and you might be interested in our episode 50 episode, because if you know how this show operates, there's only one thing you do at episode 50. If it's part of the main show, you do the top 50 Nintendo games of all time. So put one and one together for our episode 50 of This Nintendo Life. We will be making a joint list of the top 50 non-Tendo games, as that is games that come out on non-Tendo systems, of all time. We need to work out some more rules because there's a few tricky things, a few games that might fall between the cracks, but we'll get there. But yeah, that's going to come out in August. So if you want to support us over there for a single $1, you can listen to that. What's probably going to be quite a long episode where we discuss the top 50 non-Tendo games of all time.
Yes, absolutely. So go check that out if you are so willing. You can find us in various places across the internet, such as Spotify or Stitcher, or any place you can download a podcast like Pocket Casts, an app which sometimes works, sometimes doesn't. Who the fuck knows? Sometimes it gives us episodes, sometimes it doesn't. But it's still the best thing that is out there at the moment, currently.
We've got like 93 ratings on Pocket Casts.
No, do we? What?
Yeah.
On Pocket Casts?
Yeah.
Specifically? Not Apple Podcasts?
I don't think they're linked. I think
what?
It's its own
How do you even
thing.
see that?
I had to unsubscribe from our show and then resubscribe to view it.
Okay. Yeah. Very strange.
So
all
thank
right.
you for those.
Appreciate that. You can review us, rate us on all those places, Apple Podcasts, Spotify. It's very much appreciated when you do that, because that helps the show get to different places, other people to see it. It's all very nice. And yeah, you can find us on social hellscapes as they are. I'm at LordNBZ. Where can they find you, Bally?
I'm on Twitter and that other one called Blue Sky at Ballyman91. That's BALLYMAN91.
And you can find the podcast at TNL Podcast. Go there for a link to our Discord, for our YouTube channel, and updates about the show and what we are doing.
It's good for updates when MBZ is ill and the show is delayed. Would highly recommend.
I do feel this freedom now, Bally, because we did 10 years where we didn't miss a single thing, and now I'm like, we did that. It's fine if we delay stuff. I don't mind anymore. It's okay. We can take a break. We can do whatever.
I think delays are okay when our lives are so busy. And,
yeah, absolutely.
I think it's okay.
I was happy with the 10-year streak, and now that we've done it, I'm like, we can be a bit more chill about this shit, because we proved it. So yeah, much easier to do that now. And that is pretty much gonna do us, I think. What are you gonna be playing? But I guess you're trying to finish Final Fantasy and stuff. But is any? I
am trying to finish Final Fantasy. I might start a very Scottish game called A Highland Song, which I've heard is like a 2D Breath of the Wild. I think that's my grand plan to probably play for next time. What
nice.
About you?
I'm probably jumping into the legendary Starfy because, news alert, Nintendo dropped 3 Japan-only GBA games, the Starfy games. You don't know who Starfy is.
Are they good?
I don't know. I mean, I haven't played it yet, so I'm not sure. But Starfy is a character who's a star. He kind of looks, I guess, like a Kirby-adjacent type of character.
Like that dude, what's that Sega game we played?
Oh, Rystar?
Rystar,
yeah. Slightly different to that. Starfy is very cute. But Densetsu no Starfy, the 3 GBA games are now available on Switch. So I did what any sensible person would do. I ignored that. I went on the internet, I downloaded a ROM for the Japanese version, found a fan translation and patched that, and then put it on my Steam Deck. So now I'm playing it in English instead of in Japanese on my Steam Deck instead of on my Switch in English. So in Japanese,
then.
sorry. Yeah, so that's what I'm gonna do. I'll play it. I'll play through that first game, I think, and see how that holds up. I'm very, very curious because I've always been interested in Starfy, and now Starfy's back in the news, so I guess it's relevant to talk about him. So it's my plan is to be a Starfy head. I will be the #1 Starfy fan on the internet by the time this is done.
Starfy is a trophy in Melee, isn't he?
He is, yeah. Starfy does exist in Nintendo stuff over the years. Just nobody knows who the fuck he is because he's Japan only. So, yeah. Starfy for the next Smash is what I'd say as a main playable character, really, is what we ought to be doing. So, but anyway, that's going to do us. Thank you so much for listening. We'll be back next time with some more video and some more Nintendo, some more chatter. Until then, a goodbye. The musical interlude used on today's show was the title theme from Super Monkey Ball Banana Rumble. Copyright Sega 2024.